Hello, everybody, and everybody else. Don't want to disinclude Elsie or any of the Elsas.
Any of the else's.
I'm John Atack,
Yeah, and
and
it's like Robinson.
I'm going to sound off about something. I've spent the last 3 months working on a new book, and the book will be called If Scientology Ruled the World. So that's going to be fun. Um, and I just decided I wanted to understand better where Scientology had come from and how it was connected to the Nazis. Because when I left, um, not very long after I left in 1984, somebody recommended I read a book called The Morning of the Magicians by Pouls and Bergier, and I did. And I read it and I thought, oh, most of this is nonsense. And it's about the connection of the Nazis to occult ideas. And I think there are a couple of other books, and I think I read them.
Mhm.
And then there was some guy called, I think, Ravenscroft, who wrote The Spear of Leviathan, and I read that and thought,
It's the spear of power, I
the
believe.
Spear of Destiny.
Destiny, yeah, because
Spear of Destiny. It
you're
is the Spear of
Leviathan.
Leviathan, but the title of the book is The Spear of Destiny. You're quite right.
Yes.
Well, you're quite wrong actually, but there
Well,
we are.
I've had
We are quite right between
seen
us
him
now.
mention it, and yeah.
Yeah. And he gets about halfway into the book and tells you he's taking information from the Akashic records, which are the records of the Lords of Karma. Every little bug that lives
Are
has a
those
written
records
record of
30 a third, or are they 45s?
Nobody watching this is going to understand what you're talking about, Spike. They're 78s, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And you can play
Our
them
old person
backwards.
joke.
Yeah, well, old joke person. Um, so I sort of got interested in this connectedness because it just felt that there was something about the kind of magical belief that Hubbard was retailing and the magical belief that Hitlerites were retailing. But the problem was it didn't have an accurate book, didn't have an accurate source. So a few years later, I read Gerald Suster, Hitler in the Age of Horus, and he seemed to have some actual information going on. Didn't claim there was a regiment of dead Tibetans in Berlin or anything like that. And then Michael Wood, who actually, brilliant British documentary maker, who I had the good fortune of spending one Christmas with. We spent 3 days together. He was hiding from his girlfriend at the time, and that's the way it goes around here. And what a remarkable, lovely man he is, which is not true of most TV personalities in my experience. But Michael's really, really smart. And he made a documentary about particularly about Himmler and his involvement with the occult. And then a few years ago, I read Professor Nicholas Goodrick Clarke's The Nazis and the Occult, and more recently, Eric Kurlander, another professor, Hitler's Monsters. And it's sort of, there are a lot of points of comparison here between what certain leading Nazis believed, not so much Hitler. I mean, he had some pretty wild beliefs, but Himmler and Hans Frank, who was in charge of Poland and what they did there, or Eckert, who taught Hitler, was called his mentor, and Rudolf Hess, of course, the deputy leader. They were mad crazy for all of this stuff, and I didn't realize what I was getting into because where it's taken me is looking at the common origins of the Nazis and Scientology, and you can go, come on, that's pushing it a bit far. Common origins? Well, all right. Um, the, it was, I was re-stimulated in my quest for this when in 2015 I was given a copy of L. Ron Hubbard Jr.'s last statement, which is a manuscript called The Telling of Me by Me. And I was given this manuscript with the understanding that I would not show it to anybody and I would not copy it, and I haven't. So that was nearly 10 years ago. And in there, Nibs Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., Nibs was from 1952 through 1959. He was his father's deputy. Scientology was run by a variety of people who came and went. Mary Sue Hubbard, who was the same age as Nibs, so the same age as Ron Hubbard's son. Let's get that in the picture. She's okay. She was 18 when she took up with him. She ran some things. Nibs ran some things. Hubbard sat around smoking a lot of cigarettes, about 100 a day, and having ideas like, giving us a cold-blooded and factual account of our last 60 trillion years, which was in fact the first time that Nibs had seen his father in 10 years, because when he was 8 years old, his father abandoned him and his sister, Catherine, and stopped paying any money towards them, despite court orders saying he ought to. So Nibs at 18 went and found his dad and set up with him. And for 7 years, he is as close as you can get to L. Ron Hubbard. And he comes away, and in this manuscript says that his Hubbard continued to be a practitioner of Crowleyite magic throughout that time. We know without any shadow of a doubt that he was a practitioner of Crowleyite magic, because we have Jack Parsons' recordings of the magic ceremonies they did together, which were actual, recorded ceremonies that were recorded on a sound recorder, and then transcribed by Parsons. So we have those. We have court records from when Parsons sued Hubbard to get some of his money back. He don't think he got any of it back. And we have when Alexander Mitchell in 1969 made public this association between Crowley and Parsons and the Ordo Templi Orientis, that it was rebutted by Scientology with the admission that he had been involved with Jack Parsons. Hubbard broke up black magic in America, we're told, which doesn't seem to have actually happened. So there's no doubt there was a connection, that Hubbard was aware. Hubbard, of course, talked about Crowley, particularly in the Philadelphia doctorate course. Listen to me for 6 weeks and you've got a doctorate. There's a deal. It's only $500 as well. Only 38 people went there. But so it was perhaps he wasn't quite as popular by 1952 as he had been in 1950. But he talks about Crowley being his very good friend in those lectures, which is not true. Crowley despised him and called him a con man.
And they never really met either, too.
They never actually met. There was only correspondence that we have from Crowley to Jack Parsons and from Crowley to Carl Germer, who was the head of the Ordo Templi Orientis. Now, so I knew that Hubbard had taken certain things from there. What Nibs says is that his father was given the magic by the same person who gave it to Hitler. Now, I've not seen anything that suggests that Hitler ever engaged in ritual magic. And I have read the principal materials that are out there. He had a variety of supernatural beliefs. But certainly Himmler and others at the top of the Nazi party, Frank Hess, were believers in occultism. And the occultism they favored, which is the one we know, is Aryan race theory. This is the idea that there is a distinct genetic type which is separate from others. It doesn't mean being white. And there are an awful lot of so-called neo-Nazis who are not of German, Scandinavian, or British descent, and therefore are not Aryans, according to the definitions, which did change from time to time, but the definitions given by the Nazis. This was serious enough that they brought in the Nuremberg laws, whereby all German people had to identify themselves back through generations to prove that they had only Aryan blood. You would be disincluded if you were Slavic. So if you were Polish, Romanian, or Russian.
Or Czech or Czechoslovakian, like my line,
Yeah,
quarter of
uh,
my line.
yeah. If you came from or Hungarian, which is the other part of that world with the Magyars, but any of those people are not Aryan, just in case anybody got pretensions. And in fact, Himmler gave orders when they were on Operation Barbarossa going through Russia. He gave orders that 30 million people should be killed so that they could resettle German speakers or people they believed to be Aryan. So I got interested in this. Well, is there any kind of connection here? The German speaking people believed in the Aryan. So where does that come from? So it comes from Madame Blavatsky.
Mhm.
And there is this fascinating character. One of her biographers said of her that she was the most learned, if not the wisest, woman of the 19th century. And I think there may be something in that she was smart. She spoke 6 languages. And her
I
trajectory,
There's a difference between learned and wisdom.
yes, and then that's clear that she seems to have hoovered up everything that she could find that was a magical doctrine. So from her starting with her great grandfather's library, which was full of Masonic and Rosicrucian books, by the time she was 17 and left home, she'd already absorbed a great deal of this material. She then went all over the world. She studied with Druze Sufis in the Lebanon. She studied in Egypt. She studied in Turkey. And you'll be dealing with different forms in these places. She went to India. She did not go to Tibet. The claim was made. I think it's false. I don't think that's true. But I think there's a guy called Paul Johnson who wrote an excellent book where he's saying, well, who were the masters? Who were Maurya and Kut Humi, these Kashmiri teachers who she allegedly met in Tibet? And he gets into, I think he finds who they were. And that so she traveled. She also was in France and in England. She was in the US several times. Wherever there was a Masonic society, Freemasons, wherever there was a Rosicrucian society, she would get involved and she would hoover up everything they had. She then disgorges that in 1888 as the secret doctrine. Now, one of the things I didn't know, and it's not necessarily broadly known about Madame Blavatsky, is she was a pothead. She was somebody who indulged in the reefer and really liked it. And that made me think about Rabelais, the great French writer, who just goes on and on and on and on. And of course, we now know was smoking dope. It can happen. It gets a bit long-winded sometimes. But it also, of course, and here's a connection for you, gave us the motto of the Ordo Templi Orientis: do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. And it comes from a novel written in the 17th century by Rabelais. So this is a bit Rabelaisian, isn't it? She smoked a load of dope, hoovered up all of this information, and then gave us, a 1,500-page summary. And in that summary, she tells us about the Aryan race. And you can go to Wikipedia, and if you really want to baffle yourself, there are 7 root races. And this is all true, by the way. You can believe me, I'm a salesman. This is all absolutely true. 250 million years ago, intangible beings became tangible on the earth, and the first intelligent beings were here 250 million years ago. They very cleverly left no trace. You then go through other root races, and I will get into this in the book that I'm writing. I'm not going to do it now. Until you get to the 5th root race, there will be 7 in all. You get to the 5th one, that's the Aryans. And they, 2.5 million years ago, so 500,000 years before the earliest hominid fossils of Homo erectus, 500,000 years before that, there were intelligent beings who were blonde and blue-eyed. But unfortunately, and they were the descendants of gods, and it's not just Madame Blavatsky, but Himmler believed this too. They were descended from directly from the gods, and they had electron powers. Himmler spent a huge amount of money trying to find out about these electron powers. They could shoot electricity. It was because their pineal and pituitary glands were properly aligned and ours aren't. They had no idea in the 19th century what the pineal and the pituitary do, so they were considered to be atrophied by Madame Blavatsky. And Thor's hammer is an example of the thing, and the Sigruins, the lightning flashes, represent the energy given off. And there was very serious amount of money spent in, trying to get Indiana Jones to find out what this really was, or Indiana Jones's contemporaries, let's put it that way. And so you've got this, they descend from the heavens encased in ice, and they're very happy and everything's lovely. And then they miscegenate. They have sex. So they're these beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed people, and they have sex with apes. Who would have guessed? Now I'm going, look, there's something a bit wrong with them if they want to do that. Before we go any further, no matter how superhuman they are, these aren't the kind of people I want to hang out with if they're willing to do that, because that is really, that no, you know, people who fancy orangutans, that, and I like orangutans, I just wouldn't want to have sex with one, But these people did, they loved it, and they created the half-breeds who are the Aryan race now. So what Himmler tried to do is he created the Lebensborn, where handsome SS officers would have sex with blonde-haired, blue-eyed women until eventually the electron powers would be bred back into them. So here you've got this supernatural nonsense going back. They kind of go, well, yeah, what on earth has this got to do with Scientology? Well, I'm going to tell you. What this has to do with Scientology is that Scientology is a derivative of Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis. Now, there's a scholar, a PhD scholar called David Barrett, who wrote a book where he says, yep, Hubbard very obviously did practice ritual magic, but none of it has got into Scientology. And I wish he'd read the paper that I published, I think it was 93, called Possible Origins of Dianetics and Scientology, because if he had read that, he would have seen there are many commonplaces between the Crowleyite ideas and Hubbard's. For example, the idea of prenatal conditioning in the womb. You'll find that in Crowley. It's not the only place you'll find it. Find it in Otto Rank, but Hubbard never mentions Otto Rank. And you'll find it in Nandor Fodor, who's become a fictional character on TV more recently. But he was a real doctor in the 1940s who wrote a book called The Search for the Beloved, an investigation into the trauma of birth and prenatal conditioning, which was advertised on the back of the first edition of Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. It came out a year before, same publisher. So the idea was around.
Peter saw that. I mean, I was in a ritual magic Crowleyite group, and one time while we were watching, I think it was Lisa McPherson trials on, he said Dianetics is right, and Hubbard got it, but they've gone wrong since Hubbard died. But also I recognized it when I took a look at Scientology after getting out. It's like, oh my God, this is the same I was just
Yeah.
recovered from. It was so very familiar, which is why I got involved with a bunch of ex-Scientologists on the baby internets, because it was so similar. Helped me unweave a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, somebody who's a member of Scientology is going to say, but we don't practice ritual magic. Well, I haven't found any evidence that the Nazis practiced ritual magic. What I have evidence of is supernatural beliefs, and that we find that the same supernatural beliefs permeate Scientology and the Nazis. For example, the belief in reincarnation. This was not a common belief in the West. When Madame Blavatsky in the 1880s starts making a noise about it, it has become a common belief, but it most certainly was not a common belief at that time. Now,
the hermetic levels and the secrecy and the idea of going up level by level by level by level and having revealed wisdom come to you in steps.
yeah. what's called a neo-gnosis, the new Gnosticism, the idea of initiations or levels and going through, and one sees in Scientology that where Hubbard labels the material above clear, the
Hmm.
operating Thetan levels, Crowley labels them the OTO levels. They both use Roman numbers
Hmm.
to show these levels. Curiously, the ceremony that Hubbard and Parsons performed, and I was really amazed at this, and I'm amazed still. I wrote about this in Blue Sky, which was published in 1990. I'd expected that people would keep digging, that they'd find out more. I don't think they have, and we need somebody from the Crowley side, somebody who really understands that stuff. And I'm not going to be that person to
Hmm.
actually make more comparison. However, what I've now gone back and read some more of Crowley's work, which I'm not tremendously keen on, I must say. But what I have found is if you trace the history, then something very interesting happens. The Ordo Templi Orientis is a German group. Crowley took possession of it in the 1920s. It came into being somewhere around the beginning of the 20th century. It was founded by three men, Royce, Kellner, and Hartman. And this is the origin of the group that will become Scientology, with certain transformations taking place. Hubbard will grab hold of a little bit of early Freudian, Joseph Breuer therapy, which is Dianetics, and he will merge this with science fiction and Crowley. Certainly, the year that he creates Scientology, 1952, really starting in the February when he doesn't have Dianetics anymore, and he's got to make something new. And most of what would become Scientology is actually described during that year. So, a very interesting lecture called Battle of the Universes from April 1952 was brought to my attention. And I have the actual recording, and you did the actual transcription. So much for AI. It took so much correction. But in there, he is having a conversation with Mary Sue Whip, who will become Mary Sue Hubbard later. Just the two of them, no audience present, which is unique among the recordings, as far as I know, of the hundreds that I've been through, their lectures. Here you've got them sitting in a room talking to each other, the battle of the universes. And he goes into a transmedium state, which again, I am not used to. He'll start talking like this and going off in a funny way, the way that transmediums do.
Hmm.
And he starts talking about, he says there are 80 universes, I think it is, he's aware of. Who knew? The other 79 got lost in Scientology a bit later. Some of them are material universes, some of them are immaterial universes, theta universes, as he would say. And he then starts talking about these beings that are being dumped on the planet, and they're called targs, 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 and that they inhabit human bodies. They join together and get into human bodies. This is a prison planet, he says. And he talks for the first time about the fourth and fifth invader forces, who are the fourth are on Venus at a median temperature of 400 degrees, not very healthy. The fifth are on Mars. They have big hands at a median temperature of about minus 40. And you're kind of going, so these beings, they colonize these three planets, two of which are not habitable. They colonized these three planets and they decided to use the nice one as a prison. Not
Yeah,
very smart, really.
that's another conceit that's in a lot of the New Age ones. If not a prison, then a kindergarten planet.
Well, that sounds about right,
I will
seeing what we've
also
seen
say that.
recently.
But I will also say that Targ is a Klingon pig.
Yeah, well, I think he got to it before the Klingons. This is
Yeah.
1952. So the
Okay, fair enough.
Klingons are going to be sued by
And there's
Scientology.
only so many syllables you can fit into the human mouth, so something's going to be cognate.
So he is talking about invaders from other planets and these beings that are being shoved inside us and it being a prison planet, it's fundamentally what will later become OT3. In 66, 67, he will come back to this idea. It did not catch in 1952. Nobody was interested in indwelling entities. There are a couple of other places where he mentions it, and then he goes, oh, I can't sell this. I'll find something else. But most of the ideas of Scientology, the service facsimile, the overt motivator sequence, of course, reincarnation, which was what caused the break with the Dianetic Foundation, because they weren't willing to believe in it. And so he took it off somewhere else. So we see these ideas. You can show a clear link through to Crowley and the OTO, but what I hadn't done before was go behind that and say, well, where did that come from? And the interesting character is Franz Hartman. Franz Hartman was a German American. He was a doctor, a medical doctor. And please, if anybody watching can correct me, please do. I welcome it. If I make a mistake, I want to know. I am not going to get upset with people because they put me right. I'd rather they didn't call me names while they do it, but that's fine too, you know, as long as they're reasonable names. But Hartman was a close friend of Madame Blavatsky. In fact, he was such a close friend that when he wrote a satire attacking Theosophy, she published it. Bless her. So she had a certain spirit. We'll give her that. Can't see Ron Hubbard publishing a criticism of him. It's not going to happen, is it? He was also a theosophist, though he kept back from the organization because he believed it was a dilution, which of course it inevitably was. So you have this guy who helps found this organization that will be the place where Scientology comes from. So we go back and we've got these Aryans 2.5 million years ago, miscegenating with apes. And this gives us, and this is terrible. I've written 3 chapters, right, tracing the route from Madame Blavatsky to the Tool Society, which is the occult group which founds the Nazi Party. There's no doubt about that. They're a group with occult beliefs. But of course, Aryan race theory is an occult belief. It's not a belief based on anything scientific. The modern understanding of DNA absolutely proves that it's impossible to have this genetic purity. We don't have it. You can look at anybody's genetic makeup and you'll see that it's from all over the place. But so I wrote 3 chapters showing the progression of these ideas, and then went, this is way too long-winded, you know. So there might be another book that comes, you know, there'll be 3 paragraphs from that. There might be another book about, you know, Nazis and the Aryan race theory that comes out of this. But it interested me to kind of go, there is a common origin. And then you go before that. And there is some really amazing material that nobody had told me about. It's not that it wasn't known, just nobody came around and went, John, you don't know this, mate. You need to know this. Madame Blavatsky was a member of a group called the Carbonari. Now, I saw that and thought, oh, that's a creamy pasta sauce, isn't it? But that's carbonara. And she wasn't a member of a creamy pasta sauce I don't think. Smoked a lot of dope, so she might have been, you know. These people included Mazzini, Garibaldi, and Victor Emmanuel. And for anybody who's not expert in Italian history, like me, Victor Emmanuel, Grand Master of the Carbonari, will become King Victor Emmanuel of Italy. Mazzini is the guy that started the whole rebellion against the outsiders to unify Italy under a king. And Garibaldi is the guy we remember, and after whom Garibaldi biscuits are named, just in case, which I think are little flat things with dead flies in them. Sorry, currants. I always think of them as dead.
An image on the screen because you know.
Yeah, that's right. I don't mind raisins, don't get me wrong, or sultanas, but currants, We took these grapes with the pips in and dried them. I mean, what's that about? And they made
I like
biscuit.
currants.
Well, you can, but I don't. I don't want grit in my raisins. It's just all there is to it. It's unhealthy. It's demeaning. It's demoralizing. What can I say? So these people were members of a Masonic lodge called the Carbonari, and they conquered Italy. Now, Blavatsky, of course, she fought at the Battle of Mentana and was wounded. And she actually showed the 3 wounds she received physically and actually, rather than the kind of ectoplasmically sort of way that tended to be more what was happened when you were
So they
cracking your
were
knuckles with your
physical
toes.
injuries.
Yes, physical injuries to hip and back. So she actually, what an incredible character. But she, the thing that gets me, and this is a cult related thing, so many people still believe in the ideas that she put forward. Unfortunately, if you look backward in history and say, what has been proven of the ideas that she put forward, and I think it was a guy called Donnelly that she was riffing off, who'd brought up this idea of how old the Earth was and what have you, and made all this stuff up. And he's a notorious idiot, and she believed him. She's a bit sad. So her idea of the age of things, 250 million years intelligent life, there'd be something left. If there had been a culture, there'd be some little bits of pottery or some bones or something. Over that period of time, 250 million years, there'd be something left. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing, unless you read von Daniken. And I'm not going to do that again. I did that. What a bad idea that was. What a waste of time. So looking historically at these great intellectual, mystical magi, what they said is not true. And it's important. When Hubbard talks about the Piltdown Man, they've never corrected that. The fact that the Piltdown Man was in fact a hoax, and that was known pretty much by the time Hubbard talked about it in 1952 in Scientology, What Toward It, which became Scientology, A History of Man. And then we're not descended from clams, So I'm sorry, the boohoo and the grim weeper. And it's not a cold-blooded and factual account of our last 60 trillion, 73 trillion, or 76 trillion years, according to which part of the 90-page book you read. They've corrected it in the new editions. Miscavige has gone, it's 76 trillion years throughout. So the idea that he added 16 trillion years, just get this. We're living in the universe, which is the background microwave radiation from the Big Bang says it's 13.8 billion years old. Monkeying around with 16 trillion years, adding 16 trillion years, which is orders of magnitude bigger, larger than the time we've actually been grooving on this planet, it's unprincipled. When we look back at what these people say the past was, then we look at what they say the future will be. And they're wrong. So they're wrong about the past, they're wrong about the future. And yet people still say, but she had psychic powers. And I'm going to finish this rant with, because I think this is enough, really, with some nasty comments, because I promised this, about Carl Gustav Jung. Not only was Carl Gustav Jung virulently anti-Semitic, he believed in the Aryan race. He believed that the Aryan race had its own collective unconscious, which he said was superior to that of the Semitic peoples. But also Jung, who is one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. There's no doubt about that. Tremendous influence, particularly in areas like anthropology and history of religion, and also in therapy. And there are still people who are using this stuff. If you've ever taken a Myers-Briggs personality test, that's based on the work of Jung. And it's not really a great idea, but we won't get into that here. But Jung, there's this incredible series of documentaries. I think it's called Jung on Alchemy. And I managed to get into the second hour of it before going, I can't take any more of this. Because you find he had this huge library of alchemical texts. And what he believed was that the illustrations in these things, and they're like Hieronymus Bosch paintings, most of them, the illustrations in these things represent aspects of the collective unconscious. And therefore, they have a real value. And looking at this, I'm going, this touches on a fundamental error that is found in Theosophy, in Anthroposophy, which derives from Theosophy, and in all of these guru systems where you have a guru who is infallible, and yet they've made mistakes. And there's a Hubbard axiom, I haven't looked it out yet, but I do mean to say something about it, where Hubbard says that imagination is just the reconstruction of past events. And it's that, so what Jung didn't realize was that the people drawing these pictures could have imaginations. So they're not, when my lovely wife has some coasters that are medieval images of knights fighting snails. Now, this didn't actually happen. These are pictures. Carl Gustav Jung, this didn't happen. When you start sitting down with an e-meter and going, oh, what's going on in my head? It must be true because the electrical resistance in my palms changed as my sweat glands expanded and contracted. It's not about sweating. That this must be true because the e-meter did this. And you go, well, the e-meter is utterly fallible. That, the only scientific test I know of one, 50% of the readings were generated by the machine. There's no doubt about that. I talked with the guy who did the experiment. 50% of the readings were fake. The rocks, which is produced without electrodes plugged in, the machine does it. I've seen them doing it, with no electrodes plugged in because they've got carbon specks floating around inside them. But you get to this point where I will believe it to be true if heads come up on the coin. It's like, okay, this is not a way of determining scientific evidence. And it is the method that was used by Madame Blavatsky. It's the method that was used by Rudolf Steiner. It's the method used by Aleister Crowley. It's the method used by Ron Hubbard. That they just conflate all of and by Jung, they conflate all of these things together and say, it must be true. I believe that we have the power of imagination. I think we can invent things. I don't think that the creatures in Hieronymus Bosch, his wonderful paintings, which I have admired in Brussels and in Madrid, I don't think those creatures actually existed. Is that, the fish that's got a fish top and human legs, I don't think that actually existed. I think we are capable of making stuff up. And I think that's really the end of this conversation is they made it up. They just made it up. There's no need to believe nonsense. There's certainly no need to harm ourselves or others because we've believed that 2.5 million years ago, the descendants of the gods came down in shards of ice. Speaking of which, in the 1952 Battle of the Universes recording, Hubbard talks about the Targs coming down encased in ice. Who'd have thought? World ice theory, but we won't get into that.
Around the rocks.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Scotsman on the rocks. So, in the words of Forrest Gump, that's all I have to say about that. And thank you very much, Spike. Thank you very much, people. Thank you very much, penguins. And we'll see you on the other side of the bridge.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.